Welcome to Mindcast. I'm your host, Will, and today we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating stories unfolding in artificial intelligence right now. It's a story about how billion-dollar lawsuits, enterprise customers, and ruthless market forces are doing what regulators haven't been able to, actually changing how AI companies handle data. I'm calling it governance by consequence, and it's fundamentally reshaping the entire AI industry as we speak. Let's start with where we were just a few years ago. Remember Facebook's old motto, move fast and break things? Well, the AI industry took that philosophy and ran with it, straight into what I'm calling the original sin of modern AI. Companies like OpenAI, Google, Meta, and Anthropic were in an unprecedented arms race to build the most powerful language models. And to do that, they needed data, massive amounts of data. The scale we're talking about here is almost incomprehensible. We're talking about data sets containing hundreds of billions of tokens, essentially every piece of human-written text they could get their digital hands on. So, what did they do? They scraped every piece of content they could access, the entire public internet. News articles, books, social media posts, forums, you name it. But here's where it gets really interesting. They didn't stop at publicly available content. Internal court documents reveal that companies knowingly downloaded millions of books from pirated shadow libraries like Library Genesis, Books 3, and the pirate library Mirror. We're talking about over 7 million digitized books in Anthropic's case alone. These shadow libraries contain virtually every book published in the last several decades, totaling tens of terabytes of copyrighted material. And the AI companies knew exactly what they were doing. Now, you might think, Will, that sounds illegal, and you'd be absolutely right. But here's the thing. At the time, these companies thought they were protected by something called fair use. The argument went like this. We're not copying these books to redistribute them. We're using them to train AI in a transformative way. Kind of like how a human writer might read thousands of books to improve their craft. But then came September 2025, and everything changed. Anthropic, the company behind Claude, agreed to pay $1.5 billion to settle a copyright lawsuit. Let me repeat that, $1.5 billion. This wasn't just a settlement. It was a nuclear bomb that went off in the AI industry. It sent shockwaves through Silicon Valley boardrooms and triggered emergency meetings at every major AI company. And here's the crucial part. The judge essentially created what we shall call the piracy poison pill. Judge William Alsup made a fascinating split decision. On one hand, he said that training AI on copyrighted books could be considered fair use. That was actually good news for AI companies. But then he delivered the devastating blow. He ruled that Anthropic's method of acquiring that data was illegal. You can't claim fair use protection when you built your transformative technology on a foundation of theft. It's like trying to claim you're a legitimate art dealer while knowingly buying stolen paintings. This created what could be called a taxonomy of risk for AI companies. Pirated shadow libraries, legally radioactive, scraping news websites without permission, high-risk territory, especially after what happened next. Because while Anthropic was dealing with the piracy poison pill, OpenAI was facing a completely different kind of legal challenge that was arguably even more dangerous. The New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI represents a strategic evolution in how to attack AI companies legally. Instead of focusing on the input, what data was used for training, the Times focused on the output. They showed that ChatGPT could generate verbatim excerpts from paywalled New York Times articles. Essentially, ChatGPT was creating a substitute product that let users bypass the newspaper's subscription model entirely. This shift from input harm to output harm is brilliant legal strategy. It attacks the fourth and most important factor in fair use law,
the effect on the potential market for the original work. When you can show that an AI is directly competing with and potentially replacing the original content, the fair use defense becomes much, much weaker.
So, how have AI companies responded to these existential legal threats? With what I call the fair use paradox. In public court filings, they're still vigorously defending their right to scrape data for free under fair use. They have to. Abandoning this defense would be admitting guilt for all their past activities and exposing them to incalculable liability.
But privately, they're paying hundreds of millions of dollars to license the exact same type of content they claim a right to use for free. OpenAI's deal with News Corp is worth over $250 million over 5 years. Microsoft is paying tens of millions annually to license content for Copilot. Google has struck deals with publishers worth hundreds of millions. This isn't altruism. It's sophisticated risk management. They're essentially buying insurance policies against catastrophic legal losses. These companies are treating licensing fees as the cost of doing business in a post-fair use world. This has created an entirely new market, the AI data licensing ecosystem. We've gone from data being essentially free to it becoming a significant operational cost. And here's what's fascinating. This is creating new competitive advantages. Companies with deeper pockets can secure cleaner, legally indemnified data, while smaller players get squeezed out. It's fundamentally changing the economics of AI development.
Now, there's another fascinating dimension to this story that really reveals how market forces are driving governance: the stark privacy schism between enterprise and consumer users. If you're a business customer using OpenAI's API or Microsoft's Azure OpenAI, your data is absolutely, unequivocally not used for training by default. These companies will give you ironclad guarantees about data privacy. But if you're a regular consumer using ChatGPT or Claude, well, your conversations might be used for training unless you specifically opt out. This isn't hypocrisy, it's market segmentation. Enterprise customers have collective bargaining power and are willing to pay premium prices for privacy guarantees. Individual consumers, they lack that market power, so they get a different deal. What I find most interesting is how this reveals that we're not seeing universal ethical principles at work. We're seeing sophisticated risk management and market segmentation strategies. The self-governance is actually governance by consequence. Companies are changing their behavior because the consequences of not changing are too severe to bear.
This brings us to the technical side of the story. All those sophisticated alignment techniques that AI companies love to talk about, things like reinforcement learning from human feedback, constitutional AI, advanced safety filters, they're essentially expensive band-aids. These companies are spending enormous amounts of computational resources to teach their models not to exhibit behaviors they learned during the initial training on questionable data. We're talking about thousands of GPU hours, millions of human feedback ratings, and teams of hundreds of researchers working to essentially undo problematic patterns that were baked in during the initial training. It's like building a house on a shaky foundation and then spending millions on structural reinforcements. The entire alignment field is, in effect, a massive effort to sanitize outputs that stem directly from this original sin of indiscriminate data collection. They're treating the symptom, undesirable outputs, rather than the root cause, unvetted, low-quality inputs. Now, you might be wondering, what about government regulation? What about the EU AI Act or the Biden administration's AI principles? Here's the thing. While these frameworks are important for setting long-term standards, they're operating like distant thunder compared to the immediate lightning strike of litigation and market pressure. The EU AI Act requires companies to publish summaries of copyrighted data used for training. That's the regulatory floor. But the market, driven by fear of billion-dollar settlements, is forcing companies to actually license that data, a much higher and more expensive bar. The EU AI Act's maximum penalties are typically in the tens of millions, substantial but manageable for billion-dollar companies. But a single copyright lawsuit settlement can exceed a company's entire annual revenue. The market is essentially imposing a private regulatory regime that's far more stringent than anything governments have managed to implement.
So where does this leave us? We're witnessing the emergence of a new equilibrium in AI development. The era of unchecked data acquisition is definitively over. Data provenance, auditing, and licensing are no longer optional. They're as critical as computing power and algorithmic research. For AI companies, the strategic imperative is clear. De-risk the data supply chain at all costs.
For creators and publishers, the legal tide is turning. The ongoing litigation is forcing a long overdue recognition of the value of creative work that underpins the entire generative AI ecosystem. We're seeing the negotiation of a new social and economic contract between AI builders and content creators.
What fascinates me most about this story is how it demonstrates that sometimes the most effective regulation doesn't come from government at all. It comes from the tangible consequences of legal challenges and market demands. The courts and the enterprise customers are doing what regulators couldn't, actually changing corporate behavior in real time. The future of AI will be defined not just by the pace of innovation, but by this ongoing negotiation between the creators of AI systems and the creators of the content that makes them possible. It's governance by consequence in action, a reactive form of self-regulation forged in the crucible of billion-dollar lawsuits and unforgiving market demands. But here's what I think is the most profound implication. This is creating a new form of technological feudalism. The companies with the deepest pockets, Microsoft, Google, OpenAI with its Microsoft backing, can afford to license clean data and avoid legal risks. They're becoming the technological nobility, with privileged access to premium, legally indemnified content. Meanwhile, smaller AI companies, startups, and open-source projects are getting squeezed out. They can't afford $100 million licensing deals or billion-dollar settlement risks. They can't hire the legal teams needed to navigate complex copyright negotiations. We're watching the AI industry consolidate, not because of technological superiority, but because of legal and financial moats that have nothing to do with innovation. This has profound implications for AI progress itself. The diversity of approaches, the experimentation, the democratic access to AI development, all of this is being quietly stifled by a new economic reality where only the richest companies can play. That's all for today's episode of Mindcast. I'm Will, and I hope this deep dive into the hidden forces shaping AI development has given you a new perspective on how tech companies actually change their behavior. The story of AI data governance is really a story about power, money, and unintended consequences. As we watch this transformation unfold, it's worth asking, is this the kind of AI future we want? One where innovation is constrained not by technical limitations, but who can afford the legal overhead? Sometimes it's not about ethics or principles, it's about consequences. Until next time, keep questioning the narratives behind the technology that's reshaping our world.